Today at the FIDE World Cup Knockout Tournament, we had the quarter-final tiebreaks. This was really tense. 3 matches still going. So we had Sindarov playing against Jose Martinez. Then Sam Shankland faced Yesipenko. And Wei Yi against Arjun Erigaisi. Now I'm going to dip into all 3 matches. Remember, if they get into the semi-finals, they're almost, but they're within touching distance of one of those 3 candidate spots. So obviously there was a lot resting on these matches. Let's take a look. The first match we're going to take a look at is Jose Martinez against Sindarov. So Jose Martinez, an online blitz sensation, and he seems to be translating that blitz skill into classical chess. Sindarov, well, he's only 19 years old and already rated well over 2700, so he's actually favourite in this match. However, in the tiebreaks, of course, it's a faster time control, 15 minutes on the clock plus 10 seconds per move. And in the first game, Martinez won convincingly. This was the final position. You can see there's a check there. And this pawn is about to advance. This is where Sindarov resigned. What a shocker. So Sindarov had to win in this next game to level the scores to take the tiebreak further. Well, let's see how he did. So Sindarov playing white. It's in English. And a pretty well-known variation. White breaks with d4 and has a bit of a space advantage. I always like playing this position with white, actually, because this bishop rakes across the board and it's nice to have some kind of control over d5. But this has been quite popular lately with black, with this move h5, which immediately puts white under a bit of pressure. So white has to decide, do you play h3 to meet h4 with g4? Do you ignore it, or do you block with h4? Already there's a, white is challenged. Black is asking some questions, trying to shake white's central control with, a kingside advance. Well, Sindarov just decided, right, I'm blocking that one out. But it does mean that this square could be used for black. b3, a6. So very often black wants to try to break with b5. Now knight g4, here we go. Martinez moving the knight into a strong position. Remember, he just needs a draw from this game. But I don't think a draw is really on his mind here, because he absolutely went for it with b5. Sindarov took it. Of course, can't take again because there's a pin. Queen c1. And rook c8 is a very natural move, just to line up the rook opposite all those pieces. Knight takes b5. Well, that's a brave move from Sindarov. Of course, he would like an exchange of bishops here. That would solve a few problems. But no, knight ce5 from Martinez, keeping the tension. That blocks things on the diagonal. Queen b6. Yeah, black is active. I mean, this is quite scary for white. Queen d2. So just stepping out of the pin. And now Martinez absolutely went for it. He's a pawn down. And if he does nothing, then white is going to advance here. So g5, and this is where the position absolutely exploded. Well, first of all, if queen takes, then the queen comes unstuck. It's trapped. So pawn takes pawn, but now black advances. I mean, this is incredible. Basically, Martinez is giving up. He's given up his queenside pawns. He's given up his kingside pawns. His king does have these 3 pawns in the middle. But, well, all bets are off now. Oh, here's a nice tactic. Suppose white thinks, okay, I'll try and keep things closed Or maybe just take a piece. Then h3. And if bishop h1, you can take here. Now there's a pin, so you've got to take with the queen. h2 and knight e3 check. Wow, forking king and queen, terrifying. So pawn takes pawn. Rook takes. I mean, this is scary. Knight b4, very cool. That's where that knight wants to be, on that beautiful d5 square. If that queen can head over to h2, that would be good news for black. But at the moment, it's a long way from the king side. Anyway, e6 controls d5 square. a4, very cool move. Sindarov basically has decided, right, I can't do much on the king side. Let's just get things going. Can't see any immediate threats. But d5, a5, and that move d5 has given the queen a square, and now it's looking down at h2. So Sindarov blocks that diagonal, and Jose is absolutely going for it. Queen f8. So he's looking to switch the queen round here, sack the rook and mate on h2 with the queen. e3. Now that's a good move because it means the queen connects here. So in fact, after queen h8, there isn't a threat. Imagine if the queen weren't there, then rook h1 takes, and then queen h2 would be mate. But with the queen on d2, the h2 square is protected. That's important. So Sindarov, well, he plays a very brave move. He simply takes the knight. But that takes real guts. Seems to bring the bishop into the attack. Scary. But he's planned it, of course. Rook f4. Remember, Sindarov is in a must-win situation. Bishop b5. I mean, this is completely random. Completely, for it feels like it. I mean, the truth is that black's attack, well, needs something more. These pieces simply aren't breaking through. These pieces are enough to defend at the moment. Bishop b5. I mean, who knows where that one's heading. But anyway, Sindarov decided to call his bluff, and he took it. Bishop takes b2. Now, no doubt this rook could move somewhere, but Sindarov crashes in with knight takes d5. Now, if that's taken, then this happens. Takes, and now we can see the point of taking on d5, and that king is not escaping. So king f8 played, knight d6, the knights are closing in. This looks like a deadly counterattack. f7 is vulnerable. Rook a f1. So white's pieces are now lining up against black's king. There's still nothing doing down here. You can just take it. Bishop c1. So, well, Martinez is doing his best to distract the queen, but rook takes f5. Giving up a rook, but breaking through. He's got material to spare. And the game ended like this. Knight f4. Knight e4, and that was the final move of the game. Well, if the king comes back, then it's actually mate pretty swiftly. The king has no hiding place. For example, I mean, there are alternatives, but black's king gets mated. Wow, what a comeback from Sindarov. But Martinez absolutely went for it. Was that the right strategy? Well, who knows? So that meant that scores were level again, and they went into two 10-minute games. The first 10-minute game was drawn. Both played pretty solidly after the chaos of the previous game. So this is the second 10-minute game, Sindarov playing white. Now you can see that this is a pretty typical Marozzi bind position, with these pawns preventing black from breaking out. Well, not just this pawn, but this bishop as well. without queens, it's more difficult for black to find counterplay. And Sindarov, to move, well, found a good strategy. Knight b4. Attacks the a pawn. Now, black doesn't want to play a5 because the knight comes back and then it'll find its way into b5. And, well, that's just a beautiful spot. And black just doesn't have counterplay there. So rook a8 was necessary to defend the pawn. Now bishop e3, good hit, attacking b6. So the rook had to defend. And now knight c6, excellent move. So the threat to take the bishop and then take on b6, so bishop f8. And now b4. White is getting ready to cement that knight into that beautiful c6 square, and it really dominates black's pieces. That's a good octopus knight, I'm telling you. Knight f6 played, king f3, knight d7, king e2. Now this is a crucial moment. I'm sure that Martinez wanted to play knight b8 here to exchange off that knight. But let's see what happens. White has an excellent reply. Knight d8, bishop takes b6. Now bishop e7, it looks like that knight is getting trapped. I'm sure the players had spent some time analysing this. But actually, white is doing very well. c5. Okay, black takes the knight. And then plays c6. And you can see this knight is in trouble. So if this, then white just has an excellent rook and pawn endgame. Weak pawns, excellent pawns. And if rook c8, then rook takes d6, rook c7, b5, and basically white is winning. So Martinez played rook c7, but then b5 cemented that knight in place. And basically he never shook free from white's grip in the position. I mean, there was still some twists and turns, but basically he got squeezed here. And yeah, Sindarov won. So that meant Martinez was out. He's had an absolutely brilliant tournament, but I'm afraid this was a step too far. I think in the end, although there was a hiccup at the beginning, I think Sindarov really showed his class in this match in the later stages. Right, let's move on to the next match. Yesipenko against Shankland. Andrei Yesipenko, 23 years old, from Russia, playing under the FIDE flag. That fools everyone. Playing Sam Shankland, 34 years old, from the US of A, from California, a graduate of the Berkeley Chess School, where I've taught a few times actually. Great place. So this was an absolute roller coaster of a match. Yesipenko won the first 15-minute game. Sam hit back in the second, so they went to two 10-minute games. Yesipenko won the first, so this is the second 10-minute game with Shankland in a must-win situation playing with black. So very tense. e4 from Yesipenko. And Shankland decides to go with the Philidor, which he'd used in the tiebreak match against Vidit with success. And there we go, e5. So the main line here is to play bishop c4, like this. And let's say rook e1, c6, a4, b6. And then a very popular, very sound way for white to play is then b3 and bishop b2. And the bishop often drops back to d3 to support the e-pawn. Okay, just bear that in mind when we see how Yesipenko played in this position. He played b3. Now this is a really rare move. In some ways it makes a lot of sense compared to that main line, because you might just go bishop b2 and then play the bishop to d3 in one move and then just castle kingside. Not so silly. c6. In fact, I'm surprised that Yesipenko didn't go for it with a4 here and just bishop d3, bishop b2 and castles kingside. In fact, he had something else in mind. A really aggressive idea. Queen d2 and then castles queenside. Remember, Yesipenko only needs a draw in this game to go through. But he's playing something which is really double-edged, allowing Shankland counterplay on the queen side. Now here, I mean, one could just castle kingside and then go for a5, a4. No doubt Yesipenko would have gone for it with g4, but okay, it's a very double-edged, very interesting position. But Shankland played more modestly. And after g4, well, if that's taken, then white is in with rook g1 and rook g7. He played h6, just kind of containing white, but it's quite clear that he's not going to castle kingside. Obviously the pawns are too weak, but instead he just went for the queen side. But somehow this doesn't challenge white's system. And Yesipenko is in control in the centre, but also has some initiative on the king side. And black is a little bit cramped here. King b1, tidy move. I mean, I think that shows that, white can just hold the position, take his time. g5. Pawn takes pawn. So the knight is pushed to the side, and then watch out for knight f4, knight e2 from Yesipenko, covering the f4 square, but also putting a little bit of pressure here. So Shankland broke out with c5. So he needs to somehow get this bishop going. But white is very comfortable here after this exchange, because there's a nice square on d5. That knight can perhaps head back here. Knight takes e5, so looking to trade some pieces to relieve the congestion. Now knight c3, good move, taking control over the d5 square. Bishop e2, so again taking control over d5, but also looking at the knight on h5. Bishop f8, an exchange on e5. Exchange of rooks. The knight exchanged on h5, so that rather damages black's pawns. Now, this is a really interesting moment in the game. So here is where I'd like you to have a think. I'm going to have a drink. So white to play. Now I think there's more than one good move in this position, but I think that the path that Yesipenko chose was well, notable. Cheers. It's possible to play g6, and that brings the rook into the game. And you never know, at some point black's king's a little bit exposed. So I think g6 is a decent move. But Yesipenko played knight d5. And I think this demonstrates a really strong strategic and positional understanding. Now, of course, that's got to be taken. You can't live with a knight on d5 like that. So bishop takes, and rook takes pawn. So Yesipenko has given up a pawn. So what's his idea? Well, getting rid of that bishop, of course, means that black's king is a little bit more exposed, a little bit more vulnerable. Also opens up the bishop here. Queen f3, that queen very well placed, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn on h4. So the rook retreated. Now, of course, it's possible just to take on h5. But g6, again, I think this shows a really good understanding of the position. This pawn is not that important. What is important is to activate that rook and get through to black's king, which is in big trouble now. So king a7 to protect the pawn, fair enough. Then queen h5. So material is now level again. The e-pawn is attacked. And that's problematic. White can really start to attack through this pawn, through the 6th and 7th rank, and the king is in trouble. Black's problem is that white's king is completely safe. All you need to do is play a3 and the king is tucked away very nicely. Of course, at the moment d1 is protected anyway, but in any case, something like rook e8 protecting the pawn, then just a3. White can take time here and then organise the pieces to attack, perhaps on the 6th rank like this, cutting across the position. It's a very unpleasant situation for black. So Sam decided to go for it with c4, giving up the pawn, hoping to activate, get some play, but he was chopped down. Queen h7 check, and this is a problem because a6 is dropping. So therefore, if the king steps back, so queen e7, an exchange, and rook g7. There you go. The king is open along the 7th rank. A check. The rook came back to defend. Pawn takes pawn, and here Sam decided enough was enough. Remember, he's in a must-win situation. Yesipenko only needs a draw, but in fact, this is a completely winning position for white. I think it's completely safe. So, for example, after this, king c3, Yesipenko is already a pawn up. This one is dropping, and, well, white is in complete control with this beautiful pin on the 7th rank. There we go. So, Yesipenko goes through into the semi-finals. Sam Shankland goes out. A great pity. He's had a fantastic tournament and he stumbled at this hurdle. I think he was outplayed in this tie-break. He did have one good win in one of the 15-minute games, but in the other games, I think Yesipenko demonstrated a really strong strategic understanding, and he outclassed Sam, actually. So Yesipenko goes through. Now, we've got one more tie-break match to look at, and that's Arjun Erigaisi against Wei Yi. 26-year-old Wei Yi from China playing 22-year-old Arjun Erigaisi from India. This was the first of their tie-break games, 15-minute game, and Wei Yi absolutely went for it in this French defence. So the classical variation, f4, c5, knight f3, bishop e7, Wei Yi took, bishop e3, castles, and now h4. Here we go. So that signals his intention to attack. And attack he did with knight g5. I mean, this is really brutal stuff. f6, not the best reaction from Erigaisi. Takes on f6. Queen h5. Attacking h7. And after h6, bishop d4. Of course, it will be wonderful for black. Wonderful for white if this knight were taken, opening up the h-file. A very crude and very effective attack. So knight d7. Bishop takes rook. So already Wei Yi's the exchange up, and now he's simplified in a very nice way. I should have done a think and drink on this. If you want to pause the video, you can have a quick look. He played queen takes knight. And after pawn takes queen, he forked. Which left Wei Yi in an endgame a full exchange up. But at this point, Erigaisi fought like an absolute tiger. And finally, after 65 moves, they reached this position. Well, let's just go back a few moves, actually. So it was quite extraordinary. They had this endgame, or finally reached this endgame of rook and 2 pawns against king and 2 bishops. And actually, this is a drawn endgame. Held very skillfully by Erigaisi, and well, this was how it ended basically, and yeah, that's drawn, and quite sportingly. Wei Yi didn't try too hard here. He basically just took this and forced a draw. So first 15-minute game drawn, and then they went into the second 15-minute game. And this was a heavy theoretical battle. Now, I'm sure you know by now that the Chinese really specialize in the Petrov. So Erigaisi must have been expecting this. And this was, yeah, a heavy theoretical battle. So this has been seen quite a few times before. So white has some initiative here. If you don't know what you're doing with black, then this can spell trouble because white has a strong initiative right from the word go. But in fact, Wei Yi clearly had done his homework and defended excellently. And in fact, they're following a previous game, between Nils Grandelius and Lenier Dominguez, which went like this. They're still following an old game. And here Grandelius played h3 and the game was eventually drawn. I'm sure both players knew of this. Erigaisi played h4. But Wei Yi, I think, played excellently. Now this is a really long game. But basically, in the end, Wei Yi proved that this early activity for white really came to nothing on the king side. In the end, these pawns were not great. Reminds me of a winnower when it goes wrong for white. And yeah, Wei Yi took control. It's a long game, folks. I'm not going to give it all. And by this stage, Wei Yi was just looking for a breakthrough. He found it with he found it with b4 and then c3. Now this is a good move. Bishop f5, so that the rook can just swing across here, and that is game over. The game ended like this. So the king managed to come back to defend the rook. But this was a very simple win. So Wei Yi ends up with 2 extra pawns, and then it was a very simple task to shepherd one of them home. So Arjun Erigaisi, India's last hope in the tournament, is knocked out. Wei Yi goes through. But I have to say, in this second 15-minute game, he really did outplay Erigaisi. Really showed what a classy player he is. Right, let's look at those standings. Well, let's look at the tournament bracket and who's playing whom in the semi-finals. So we have an all-Uzbek matchup. We have Yevgeny Sindarov playing Nodibek Yakubayev. And they know each other very well, very interesting. Then we've got Andrei Yesipenko playing against Wei Yi. Wei Yi has to be the favourite there. But Yesipenko has shown that he's a very solid player with an excellent strategic understanding. So who knows? The Uzbek clash, all bets are off there. Who knows? So we're almost at the stage where we know who's going to qualify for the candidates. But what's really unfortunate is that one of those 4 players will not make it. Let's see what happens. Thursday is a free day, and then they resume battle on Friday. See you then.